Hey, this is Carmine Appice, Rod Stewart, Vanilla Fudge, and many more. You're listening to The Vinyl Guide.
Oh, well, thank you there, Carmine. And hey, everyone, it's Nate. Welcome to episode 313 of The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. And this week, we have an absolute legend of music and rock and roll on the show, Mr. Carmine Appice, who's sharing all sorts of stories with us today. Carmine's going to talk about his time with and influence on Led Zeppelin drummer John Bonham, the influence of the band Cactus on Van Halen, and the conversations he had with Mr. Eddie Van Halen himself on that very topic. Carmine also talks about playing and smoking with Jimi Hendrix, being behind the kit for Pink Floyd, his dealings with Ahmet Ertegun, Sharon Osbourne, and even the mob. Lots to cover here today, everyone. This is a phenomenal conversation with one of the absolute legends of modern music and one of the most highly influential individuals of rock and roll. And before we get too far along, I gotta let you guys know a few things. First off, Vanilla Fudge has a brand new single out, Stop in the Name of Love, a Supremes cover dropped some 50 plus years after the Fudge dropped the original Supremes cover that started their career. That, of course, was Keep Me Hanging On, and that was at the start of their career. This latest single is again the original four members of the Fudge in their final recording with Tim Bogert, and you can hear that single online. I'll link to the video in this episode page, or of course you can go to goldenrobotrecords.com and enjoy this monumental track. And next up, you can also go to cactusrocks.net and check out Cactus's recent album, Tightrope. And of course, carmineappice.net leads to all sorts of interesting stuff, including the pre-order of the Guitar Zeus vinyl box set, featuring tracks with Carmine playing with the likes of Brian May of Queen, Ted Nugent, Yngwie Malmsteen, Slash, Zakk Wylde, and more. And of course, everything else that carmineappice.net has to offer. Autographed items, records, books, and more. And hey there, don't forget that the Vinyl Guide here has over 300 episodes and interviews with other legends of vinyl and music, including episode 306 with Robbie Krieger of The Doors, episode 309 on the records of Randy Rhoads, featuring exclusive interviews with Randy's family, episode 294 with Ross Halfin talking all about his Led Zeppelin vinyl collection, episode 297 with Tom Scholes of Boston nerding out about vinyl and analog recording, and tons more, all available to enjoy anytime simply by subscribing or following the Vinyl Guide podcast on your podcast app. And with that, let's get into our conversation with the mighty Mr. Carmine Appice.
Hello.
Why, hello there, Mr. Carmine. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
I must say, I've had your brother on the show. I think you are the more handsome brother, if I may say so.
Oh, well, thank you.
So
I have hair, because I have hair. I have a lot of hair.
Now, your brother's been on the show. I believe his last name is Appice and yours is Appice. Do I have that right? Okay. Yeah. Good. And I'm going to assume that Appice is the correct pronunciation because you are the elder.
My father said Appice, but when, and in 1967 up until 76, when I joined Rod Stewart, everybody called me Appice and I would be correcting them to Appice. So finally, when I joined Rod, he said, we're going to be playing in front of big audiences. And I come out, I'm going to say Carmine Watt on the drums. Mm-hmm. I said, he said, what do most people call you? I said, most people call me Appice. And I correct them. So he said, well, why don't we go with that? So we went with that. And then I had an ad with Ludwig Drum Company. Everyone wants a piece of Appice. I went all around the world and all the rock magazines, all the, drum magazines. So I was Appice for 4 years. And my brother came out with Sabbath and got a lot of press. It was Appice. Ever since then, it's been a hassle. No. That's why we did a DVD called Drum Wars, right? So we can battle for the name Appice or Appice. And then my older brother got on the phone at the end and said they're both wrong. It's Appice.
It's what I was going to say. In Italian, it's Appice. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I made the whole video we did, the DVD, like worthless. But it was a part comedy DVD.
Of course.
But then, I came up with the Drum Wars idea to do these Drum Wars gigs that we're doing now. Vinny's actually out. He's staying with us here in our apartment in New York. And we're playing Friday and Saturday. We just played a couple of days ago. We had a date tomorrow, but the COVID canceled that.
Geez, still getting irregular here. Look, I was so pleased to hear this new Vanilla Fudge single, because I think it's so fitting that it's almost like a bookend, right?
Exactly right.
You've got a Supreme song.
We opened the book and we closed the book. But the other thing is, as my manager at Fudge was just bitching to the label, saying, you guys should, the headline should be Vanilla Fudge original lineup, the only band from the 60s releasing a new song with the original lineup. Nobody else has done that or can do that.
Right.
All the bands that we were on the charts with, The Doors and Hendrix and The Cream and Jefferson Airplane, even Led Zeppelin. I mean, somebody's missing, or it's not somebody, like in some bands, all of them are missing.
Right.
But we have, now Tim's missing, but we got him on this before he passed away, and he did a great job. He was sick as a dog.
Now, he knew the end was near. Was it towards the end?
It's 1 year, 1 year, 1 year later.
1 year after he
1 year,
recorded this.
yeah, one after. But I mean, he knew, they didn't know how long he had. He was still taking treatments, and he came to the session in his pajama bottoms because he has never gone out except to go to the doctor. And so his wife brought him in. He was in his pajama bottoms, and he brought a 4-string bass with him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he always played a 6-string bass in later years. He bought a 4-string bass, and he said, "I bought this for you." Right? I bought the bass. I actually went out and ordered it online, and it came, and I'm playing the 4-string. He said, "I know you love the way I play 4-string." I gave him a hug and a kiss on the cheek. I said, "That's right." I said, "Because you're a badass on the 4-string bass." So he played it on the 4-string bass, and we recorded it at Jorgen Carlson, who's the bass player for Government Mule. We recorded it at his studio in the Valley, which is maybe 15, 20 minutes from Tim's house, And then we found out that day the drums were screwed up, and we had leakage of the organ and guitar all over the drum tracks. So Jorgen said, "Well, listen to this." I said, "Oh, man." We tried a new technique in the studio. We did it in New Jersey. I said, "Man, I got to redo the drums now, But I said, "Well, at least I got Tim on it. I got Tim in a click, and I could play to Tim, and it would be fine." The only problem was I would have to go back to the studio in New Jersey, So I was living in New York and Connecticut. I'd sold my house in LA. We bought a house in Florida, but it was being renovated at that time in January of 2020. So I didn't know what to do. I just left it. Mm-hmm. We moved to Florida. I put a studio in the house. And I was doing projects. And once I developed a kick-ass drum sound, I was ready to re-record the drums. So I redid the drums on that track, and I engineered it and everything,
Mm-hmm.
And it came out great.
It's a great song and a powerful performance too. I mean, you
Yes.
and Tim, everyone really, yeah.
I mean, Mark Stein's vocal the other day on a radio station here in Connecticut, the guy put on "You Keep Me Hanging On" from years ago, and then put this on. And he said, "What about this guy's voice, Mark Stein?" He's like, "He sounds exactly the same." I said, "He does. He's 74 years old, and he sings his butt off, and his voice is awesome. I mean, my voice, I've got this reflux thing. I go hoarse. I can't reach the top note. This guy is like the same, just same voice."
Wow. Yeah, I assume that this looks like the way that Vanilla Fudge, the recording career, would conclude. It seems like a very bittersweet end.
With Tim. The idea was to do an album called Supreme Fudge, right? And we were going to do 4 or 5 Supreme songs. I have arrangements that I did on my iPad of like 3 other Supreme songs. Mark Stein has a couple of ideas, and so does Vinny, our guitar player. So we were going to, we were, when we recorded Tim, there was no COVID yet.
Yeah.
So I figured, all right, well, we'll get back into the studio. We'll work up these other songs and we'll see if we can get Tim on a couple of more, And then COVID hit and that was the end of that idea. But we had this one recorded with drums, with our bass player we use on the road, which, he doesn't lock in like Tim did, and guitar and vocal and keyboard. So we were just going to record more, but COVID hit and that was the end of it. So we had this one. So we sent it to Tim without the bass and told him to listen to it. He said, yeah, let's do it. And then we did it,
So our audience is primarily record collectors.
Right.
Definitely music nerds, but a lot of people who have collections like you see behind me and
sure.
more. Some of them have stacks of 45s in the bathtub. They're that crazy.
Yeah.
Are you a record collector? Do you collect anything?
I mean, I have records from when I had. I don't go out and buy them now. I have a stack of 45s of different stuff that I've done and some other, old stuff. And my older brother had 78s. Of like Little Richard. I remember he had an EP, a Little Richard EP. Here's Little Richard, it was called. And he was older than me, and we used to go. Like I went to see the Alan Freed rock and roll shows in Brooklyn. When I grew up. My mother took me, because my brother wouldn't take me, because he was old. He was going with his rocker friends.
Right.
And that's when I saw they had a band with 2 drummers. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. And I really liked the sound of that. And I was just starting to think about drums. My cousin Joey played drums and used to go to his house and bang on the drums. And, that 2 drummer thing inspired me to think more about drums, but.
Did you used to spend a lot of your money on records? Was that kind of how you spent pocket money?
No, I used to get it for free because I was in the business, But I did buy drum records. I got classic, Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich records and Max Roach and classic jazz drum records, I do have a bunch of those still. And I got a bunch of records in my locker. They're probably ruined by now though, because it wasn't air conditioned. Okay. I got a couple of few boxes of records, maybe 2 of your cubby holes there. I got maybe 2 of those full of records. From the old days that are okay, that have been in the air-conditioned house. They're in my studio. I haven't even unpacked them yet. And we just got a record player, though.
That's good. A lot of people, they didn't have a record player for a couple of decades now. They thought they didn't need them anymore.
Me too. Yeah, I just got a record player because now all my records are coming out on vinyl, and I want to hear them before they come out, So I got my Guitars record coming out. I got a box set coming out in November with 4 LPs, 3 CDs.
Wait, which one's this?
Guitar Zeus.
Oh, really? Okay.
And plus, I got 3 new tracks. I got Derek Sherinian from the keyboard player from Dream Theater and Sons of Apollo. And I got Tommy Thayer from Kiss on another track. And then I got a kid from a group I'm producing called Kodiak. He's like Van Halen. On another track. Then we got another track with Bumblefoot on it, and John Norum on another track, and this great guitar player from Japan named Cha, who me and Tim played with in '99. We went to Japan. We played Cha, Bogert Appice, and we played BBA stuff. Played his stuff, and we even played stuff from the BBA album that's coming out hopefully next year with 7 new songs on it. It's a live album, and it was a bootleg. So we played this one song called Satisfied because in Japan, bootlegs are huge. And the whole audience knew it. We played like the Budokan, 8,000 people, and we played 4 other shows. We did 12,000 people in Tokyo. And normally this guy only does like 2,500 people.
Wow.
So the combination of the 3 of us on the Cha, Bogert, and Appice, because we played there in '73 with Beck, Bogert, and Appice, and we were the first band after the Beatles to play the Budokan and sell it out.
Well, you definitely need to get a record player now with all that stuff coming out.
So I got a record player. We had a new Cactus record was just released this year. It was released on a double vinyl,
I when I look at your career, I really struggled to think of someone who's influenced more musicians aside from the Robert Johnsons and the Beatles and whatnot. The bands you've been in are the bands that the Led Zeppelins, the Deep Purples, everyone was listening to. John Bonham was looking at your right foot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my power, my twirls, and, and all that stuff. And funny story with when we were on the Ed Sullivan Show with Vanilla Fudge, it was just an amazing performance. And I'm playing with Ozzy and Motley Crue's opening up. And I see Tommy Lee do a spin and grab the cymbal with his arm. Like I'm the first one to do that. So I said, "Where'd you get that?" He said, "I got it from John Bonham." I said, "Indirectly, you got it from me." He said, "No, dude, I got it from John Bonham." I said, after the tour, he lived in LA. "Now come to my house. I want to show you a couple of videos." So he came over and I showed him the Ed Sullivan Show. And he was like just blown away. He says, "Dude, when was this?" I said, "This is like about a year before Led Zeppelin even were born, And then I showed him the second time, which we did our song called Shotgun. The end of Shotgun is pretty much the end of rock and roll, with that big drum fill thing.
Right.
And he said, "Dude, when was this?" I said, "This was about 4 years before rock and roll." And he was like blown away. He goes, "Dude, I can't believe you did all this before Bonzo." I said, "I told you."
Yeah.
So, we're being truthful.
John Bonham, did you spend a lot of time with Bonham? Did he?
Yeah, totally. I got him his Ludwig deal, his endorsement. I mean, now that deal is funny. I called up and said, "I think this guy's going to be big." It's like the understatement of 6 decades, But, they didn't know who he was. He was brand new. Like, people don't get that everybody's got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And he started there, and every night we played, he was like glue watching it, and I watched him. I enjoyed him. He was a good player.
Now, BBA actually, Jeff Beck was managed by Peter Grant at one point. What do you recall about dealing with the big man?
Well, we were going to put the BBA thing together with Jeff and Rod. And Rod didn't want to work with Jeff because he felt he got ripped off or something, and, because Peter was the manager. So then Jeff and Peter were supposed to come over to America. And then Jeff got in a car wreck, because he's building hot rods and stuff. And that put it back 18 months. So Cactus was supposed to be with Jeff and Rod, and it wasn't because Jeff got in the accident. So me and Tim broke up Vanilla Fudge, which was very successful at the time. And we said, "What are we going to do now?" So we said, "Well, let's get Jim McCarty." We love Jim McCarty's playing. Played, with Mitch Ryder, and he played with Buddy Miles, and he was awesome. So, as a matter of fact, Jimi Hendrix used to say he's one of his favorite guitar players, and then Jim recommended Rusty Day from the Amboy Dukes. So we put a little super group together called Cactus, and that did well. And that influenced bands like King's X, Van Halen, Dio, Whitesnake, and all those bands.
Me?
You? Okay. What do you play?
Oh, I'm horrible. No, but I love that record, especially that debut record. That just it's so vibrant. Yeah.
Well, when I got to know the Van Halens, I was on the phone with Eddie Van Halen one time, and I said, "Yeah, we're doing a reunion with Vanilla Fudge." He says, "Fuck Vanilla Fudge, put Cactus together." And then at the time during the '80s, when they were releasing Hot for Teacher, I was with Alice. Alex said, "I just want to let you know, Hot for Teacher, the blueprint for Hot for Teacher was Parchment Farm." Because it was the same fast double bass drum shuffle.
Yeah.
And we only did it that fast like that because we wanted it to be faster than 10 years after going home. It's funny how things work,
Yeah, from what I understand, the Van Halens used to pretty much play that first Cactus album verbatim.
Yeah,
that's how they.
I have tapes of them playing some of the songs, and they played Superstition, BBA, also. When Eddie was always asked like, "Who's your influences?" He never mentioned Jeff Beck, but I think he's got a lot of Jeff Beck in him. More than Clapton. He'd say Clapton, but he sounds more like Jeff Beck to me than Clapton. Because Clapton was just straight ahead player, and Jeff had the sound effects and
Yeah.
You know, the dives and, you know, all kinds of really cool stuff, you know. Clapton was just a blues player, you know.
Yeah. Jeff Beck has this thing. Frank Zappa used to call it the eyebrows. You
Right.
know, when he plays, he's got the moments where that raises the eyebrows a bit.
Yeah.
Did you ever play with Hendrix?
I knew Hendrix before he was Hendrix.
Mm-hmm.
When he was Jimmy James, we used to play where we live here in Manhattan. 7 blocks away was a club called the Lighthouse.
Mm-hmm.
And this area wasn't a good area. This is the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And it was not a good area. It was a drug-infested hooker, you know, homeless, everything here. And that's where we played together. He had Jimmy James and the Blue Flames, and had a group called Thursday's Children with a guy named Dean Parrish, who ended up being a Northern Soul guy in England. He had a big record, I'm On My Way. It was a huge record. And so we used to play opposite each other. You know, 30 minutes we played, 30 minutes he played. And, you know, we'd watch him play, and he was doing all the same stuff, you know. And then took a break, and they played records, and we'd go up to a black prostitute's apartment, smoke some pot, and talk about making it. He would talk about making it. I was just saying, dude, I just want to make a living in the music business. If I make a living, I'm fine, like my teacher, you know. And then the next time I saw him after that was 2 or 3 years later. He was Jimi Hendrix, and I was in the Vanilla Fudge. And I reminded him of that one time, and he said, where did we meet? You know, and I told him, and he said, well, what band are you in? I said, Vanilla Fudge. Man, I love the Fudge. And we did a lot of shows together after that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with the Vanilla Fudge, we did a tour in '68 and like 30 shows. You know, Cactus, our very first gig we did was with Hendrix.
Oh.
You know, we did a lot of shows with Hendrix. So, matter of fact, we were with Hendrix 5 days before he died. You know, at the Isle of Wight Festival.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Cactus played there, and we also played some festivals in Germany that got machine gunned by these rockers. It's a band, not a band, like a Holly, what do they call this? The Hell's Angels kind of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they were shooting off machine guns, and we didn't even get to play. I don't even know if Jimmy played. We were all ducking behind cars until we got a car and got out of there.
They were trying to shoot the musicians, people on stage.
I don't know what they were trying to shoot, but we got out of there. But we had a manager who was a mafia manager, and he heard the gunshots. He was, we're leaving, you know. So
that's
I don't even know if Jimmy played.
That's Philip Basile?
Phil Basile.
Basile, okay.
Yeah.
Now, from what I understand, again, you guys were dealing with Phil Basile, Lucchese crime family, I guess is right.
Yep.
And they operated many clubs in New York. How did that impact differently to the Fudge?
We'll be back after these messages.
Hey there, I gotta tell you about the Groove Washer. Not because I have to, but because I want to. The Groove Washer is the best record cleaner you can get. And if you have a vinyl collection, you need to keep it clean. Dirt and dust lead to groove wear, which affects the sound and value of your record collection. Use the Groove Washer to clean before each play, and your ears and future pocketbook will thank you. Ask for the Groove Washer by name at your local record store, or go direct to groovewasher.com and use promo code VinylGuide10 at checkout. Groove Washer is a great holiday gift. Why not send one to a friend? groovewasher.com, discount code VinylGuide10. Do it now. And all record nerds want to hear about AudiofileUSA.com, the family-owned and operated online record shop that's been in business over 30 trustworthy years. AudiofileUSA.com only sells excellent and near-mint vinyl records, only in tip-top quality for your turntable. And with over 42,000 titles, you're sure to find a bunch on your want list at AudiofileUSA.com. Audiophile vinyl is not just for the elite. Everyone can enjoy the gold standard of sound at AudiofileUSA.com. Search by title, genre, label, dig and find the deals at AudiofileUSA.com, home of the Holy Grails.
Now we return to the program already in progress.
No limits.
Now, from what I understand, again, you guys were dealing with Phil Basile, Lucchese crime family, I guess is right.
Yep.
And they operated many clubs in New York.
Yeah.
How did that impact differently to the Fudge from what other bands that weren't so connected?
It didn't really, other than the fact that, you know, that movie Goodfellas, and Henry Hill used to come to our house and pull up in an Eldorado and say, "Hey, Carmine, I got this stuff. It just fell off the truck." And he opened the trunk. He had fur coats and tape machines and color TVs. And so we'd buy all this stuff very cheap. You know?
Any Ludwig Vistalite drums?
No. But then when we go to my manager's big club, the Action House, they'd be hanging around. And we, got to hang out with them. And he'd always say, if Paulie is a Don, if he invites you to your house, you got to go out of respect, So at one time, we ended up going, all the stuff's in my book, Stick It, My Life of Sex, Drums, and Rock and Roll, all these crazy stories.
Yeah. That book is amazing. I mean, especially the women that you've had.
Oh, my God.
Oh man, do you? I find it harder. You must have a third testicle, or you've been completely out of sperm since the '80s.
I'm out.
Just dust comes out now.
My co-writer Ian Giddens, he wrote the book with Nikki Sixx, the Heroin Diaries. And when I read the book that he did with me, I said, "Don't you think we should take some of the sex out?" He said, "Dude, all the middle-aged women love that." He said, "Trust me." I said, "Okay." And now when we do gigs, every time we do gigs, and a woman buys a book, I go, "It's X-rated." She goes, "Great." And he was right. He was right. Nobody says, "Oh, it's X-rated," and put it back. Nobody.
Now, in the 80s especially, and up to current day, you were quite often shared top billing with the performer who you played with, right?
Yes.
Did that cause many problems? I imagine it must have.
Only one that caused problems was Ozzy. Not Ozzy, Sharon.
Sharon, I bet. Yeah, okay.
When she fired me, she said, "Your name is too big. You need to start your own band." But I had a contract that said I could have my own merch and I could do master classes during the day, as long as it didn't interfere with the show. And it didn't. And I was doing sold out master classes all through the tour, making some big money, giving money to a charity, to UNICEF. I got a lot of press. And my solo every night was always, big. And, they had this stairway that opened up and I came down, on this riser right to the front of the stage. And I was asked one time in Cincinnati, "What's the biggest effect?" And that was the biggest effect. And I said, "But I didn't come up with it. It was Ozzy and Sharon's idea. It's there. Whoever was playing drums came down on the solo. And just so happens that night, the effect didn't work. And I walked in for my masterclass. That article was plastered all over the backstage. And my T-shirts had the heads cut off it, out of the T-shirt. So when I said to the tour manager, "What happened?" He said, "Ask Sharon." And we had to go on stage. So I couldn't ask Sharon. And then by the time I had calmed down, and then when the thing didn't work, I just did my solo anyway. The worst part about it is that the fireworks would go off. They're big flames. And I felt the hairs in my arm.
Ooh, you're too close to the pyro.
Yeah. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to be in the front of the stage, So, but with Rod, it was great. I mean, Rod was, I said, "Look, you're going to do your solo. I want to say Carmine Appice. We're going to play in front of huge crowds. I want to make sure I say your name properly. While you're doing your solo, I'm going to go under the stage." He had like a dressing room. And I'm going to re-dry my hair. I'm going to freshen up. And I'm going to come back with a new outfit. And I know that you're going to have the audience riled up. I said, "Great." And we left it at a point where Rod would do all the big press, like Us Magazine or People Magazine, and all the big stuff like that, nationwide radio. And I would do the local stuff, local radio, local TV, local news, local whatever, And it worked great, And he didn't care. He was like Rod Stewart, Totally not. He wasn't insecure about it, but Sharon was totally. Freaked out about it.
That was right after Randy Rhoads had died. I think the year after that you were playing with him.
Probably,
Did you see any sort of, I guess, emotional residuals out of Ozzy and the team since that was so fresh at the time?
Not really. I mean, I knew Ozzy from before that.
Yeah.
I knew Ozzy from 1970 when Black Sabbath came over. One of the first gigs they did was with Cactus. And we almost had a fist fight. And somebody stole a bag of pot from our roadie. And we almost went to hands over that. And it's a good thing we didn't, because Rusty Day was a crazy guy. He always carry knives and guns, you know. So something bad could have happened that night. That's when I met Ozzy. And then when I started playing with him, we laughed about it. You know, that's how silly it was.
How did you wind up on Pink Floyd's A Momentary Lapse of Reason?
Well, they just called me. Who was the producer? Bob Ezrin produced
Bob
it.
Ezrin, yeah.
And I got home in my house one day, and there was a message on my message machine. Say, hey, Carmine, it's Bob Ezrin. I'm producing a band that's just screaming for Carmine drum fills. Give me a call. He left the number. I called him. I said, hey, Bob, what's up? He goes, yeah, like I said, I got a band that's screaming. I said, who's the band? It's Pink Floyd. I go, where's Nick? He goes, oh, Nick will be there, but they're looking for new blood. Nick's calluses are not strong. He's out racing his Ferraris, and, you know, they want to get some new blood. I said, wow, okay. You know, so I had my tech take my drums down there. And I spent the whole day doing it. And it was, I filled up, I don't know how many 24-track machines playing the song, you know, to a click. And they had like a 4-track with the song on it. And Tony Levin was there, and oh man, the rest of the band was there.
Gilmore and
a keyboard player,
Rick Wright,
and Nick, you know, and you know, I just kept playing. Finally, it was done. We all had a good time. We listened back to a couple of the takes, and Bob said, "Great job, thanks. I'll be in touch." I said, "Great." So I'm on the road. I'm doing a movie called Black Roses. This was a heavy metal horror movie. And I was up in Canada. And after like weeks of every week calling Bob, how's it going? Did you put it all together? Yeah. How was it? In one word, fantastic. Are you done? No. Okay. Call me in a week. No. One word, unbelievable. This went on for like 3 or 4 weeks. But finally, I'm up in Canada, and I heard the Pink Floyd record was released. So, you know, in Canada, you go downstairs underneath the underground there, and they always have malls and stuff because it gets so cold. So I went down there, and I actually bought a cassette. So I had my Walkman at the time, and I put it on. That's the first time I heard it. And I said, wow, this came out great, you know?
I imagine there's quite a few albums that you've played on uncredited. You've been hired to do...
Not really.
Not really? Okay.
No. I don't, you know, I always say this. I'm not like Joe Session guy, you know, like somebody calls up, Joe Schmo calls up and says, hey, I want you to play my album. I usually don't do it, you know. If Jeff Beck and Stanley Clarke called me to do the album, I did it. I didn't even get paid. I worked on Blow by Blow. I didn't get paid. You know, I worked on Eddie Money. I got paid. Eric Carmen, I got paid. Paul Stanley, I got paid. Pink Floyd, I got paid. Ronnie Wood, I got paid. You know, I only did albums with people that meant something, that would mean something to my career.
Right. Is there an album out there that you look at when you look back at your career and say, that is just, that captures everything I wanted to do right there?
There's a couple. You know, the Fudge one, first Fudge album, the BBA record, first Cactus record, my Guitar Zeus records, all of them.
Yep.
The Blue Murder record. I mean, you know, the Rod Stewart record, the first one, Footloose Fancy Fear, was a great record. You know, but I had to hold back.
Yeah.
You know, because I was playing with Rod. But those other records, there was no holding back. You know, especially the Guitar Zeus records were similar to the Blue Murder record. I had Tony Franklin and Kelly Keeling. Kelly was on the second one, and he wrote as good a songs as John Sykes wrote, and he sang as good, and he played great rhythm guitar. He played bass, he played keyboards, he played everything. And then we brought all those guitar players in, and they're all doing they're analog as well. You know. Now what I do is we record digitally, like the Fudge record. We did it all digitally. And then I got a buddy of mine that has a 24-track sculling machine with a Neve board. And we take the tracks and we run it through the Neve board, analog, into the analog machine, and then back out. And then we put that on a 2-track. And that's what we master off. That's why that Fudge song sounds classic.
It does. It really does.
That technique. And I produced it, so.
Was that first Vanilla Fudge, was that the first time that you were on a vinyl record?
Actually, I used to do demos, we'd go into the city with a band and you go in the studio and record and you come out with a not a pressing, but just
like an acetate.
Yeah. An acetate. That was the first time. But that was the very first time I ever recorded in a studio with a good producer. Mm-hmm. But it didn't matter. You keep me hanging on in a 1-take mono. Everything. Mm-hmm. 7.5 minutes to change my life. Shadow Morton really didn't do anything to the song except he had the engineer get a good sound on us. Right. We didn't know anything about that. We just did what we did. And even when we did the album, that first album was us on stage. Mm-hmm. All the overdubs were like pretty much all of us singing once. We didn't double anything. In
dealing with ATCO, Ahmet Ertegun was in the loop there. Yeah. What did you learn from Ahmet?
I learned that we shouldn't have done a second album.
You shouldn't have done the second album?
The Beat Goes On. Did you have that one?
No, I don't.
No, that's why. Everyone that had the first album was waiting for something like the first album. Go on YouTube and put in Vanilla Fudge, The Beat Goes On, mm-hmm. and have a laugh. I mean,
that's the one with the
concept album.
Yeah.
The only song on it was Moonlight Sonata, which was good. It was done Fudge style, but the rest of it was a bunch of garbage. It was like showing music from the 10th, 12th century up till the 50s, rock and roll. Playing stupid stuff. A minute of this, a minute of that, a minute of this, and then talking about like you have one speaker yelling Sieg Heil, another speaker yelling Black Power. It's stupid. But Ahmet Ertegun and Shadow Morton thought this was going to be changing of the music business. And it ruined our career. Because all the bands that were in the top 5 were in top 10 with us. Jimi Hendrix, The Cream, not Led Zeppelin, Jefferson Airplane, The Doors, The Beatles. Everybody went on to be huge because they did another album, same as the first. Mm-hmm. We didn't. If we would have done Stop in the Name of Love on a second album, we would have been huge like everybody else. We had Season of the Witch. We had some other songs as well, But it ruined our career. We had to rush into a studio and write songs and do. We had Season of the Witch recorded. And because everybody said, but they don't write songs. Excuse me. All that music we wrote, all the intros and outros and different chords and different melodies. We wrote all that stuff, but the critics didn't, were busting our balls about it. So we went in and did an original album, Renaissance. You probably have that one.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that was music. But it was too late. We lost the momentum.
Yeah.
And we didn't have that big single because we were rushing into it. And what we should have done is screw the freaking critics and done what we do, like Stop in the Name of Love, something like that. Well, we were doing Little Anthony Imperials. I think I'm going out of my head, which was amazing. We were doing It's Growing by the Temptations. We were doing all kinds of songs. Ain't Too Proud to Beg, all that stuff. But we didn't do it.
I guess that's a lesson that comes with wisdom. You got to follow your gut.
Yeah,
you got to do what it is.
But we were following the president of the company, and Shadow Morton, who's taking credit for our first album. That was huge, And me and Tim were always a little like this about it. Mark and Vinny, even though they don't say it now, they were like, "Yeah, this is cool." Back then, me and Tim were always like, "I don't know about this, man. This is too weird." And then, when it came out, people in those days, FM radio used to play the whole side of the record. They played the whole side of the record, and people calling in going, we just did acid. Take that record off. It's putting us on a bummer trip. Seriously, that's what happened. And that happened all over the country. And the album went up to number 15 on the strength of the first album. And third week, fourth week, it was like number 70, you know? And then luckily, they re-released You Keep Me Hanging On, because Keep Me Hanging On was never really a big hit. The album came out. We were the first band to break the top 10 with an album without a smash single. We had a single that went to like number 70 with Hanging On. And then when the album went all the way up, and then we got rid of The Beat Goes On, Renaissance hit the charts, you know, and then it did okay, went up to top 20, you know. But, you know, it's a big difference, top 20 to top 5, you know, as far as how many records you're selling back then, you know. So, and then we released Hanging On again, and it went up to number 4, and it brought the first album that was like 110 back up to number 15, and Renaissance was about number 40, and The Beat Goes On was like 120. You know, so we had 3 albums on the charts and a smash single, you know, but that definitely helped, because then the next album broke in at 50, 25, and then 15. And we had the single Shotgun that went top 20. And we went on Ed Sullivan again, you know, and then we broke up.
Yeah.
Because we want to start a supergroup, Jeff Beck.
That debut album cover with the nude woman and the solarized photo effect, was that the original design? Were there other options, other concepts you guys were talking about?
That's all I remember.
Okay. You remember the company just said, here's what it's going to look like.
That was the label. They said, what do you think? We all liked it. I said, yeah, cool. Because it was psychedelic, you know?
Now, in your time, I'm sure you've been offered these amazing gigs. You've taken so many amazing gigs. Were there any roles that you were offered that you turned down?
2.
Now, okay, share.
Big ones.
Yeah.
1976, I was asked to join Rainbow when they were first starting up. That's when Cozy joined. They got Cozy instead of me.
Okay. That was with the original with Bob Daisley and the group. Yeah.
So
okay.
Richie asked me to join. I said, dude, I had a band with Mike Bloomfield and Rick Gretsch from the Blind Faith. It's called KGB. MCA Records. You know, in those days, when you're signed to a label, you're signed to that label. You can't just leave. You're under contract. So I couldn't do it. So he got Cozy. When I couldn't do the Jeff Beck thing, he got Cozy. Right? So I started saying to Cozy, you my professional replacement or what? Just for fun, you know? So then 1986, I got asked to do that huge Whitesnake album, the big one, Bill of the Night and all that stuff. John Sykes and Coverdale asked me. I said, man, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I got King Cobra. I'm signed. Yeah, it's my deal, Capitol Records. I can't leave the deal. I said, maybe you know, get Ainsley or somebody. So they got Ainsley, and everybody ended up with a percentage of that album. I heard Ainsley made $500,000 on that record, you know? And I was like bummed out because the record I did with King Cobra, Capitol Records didn't do shit with it. You know, Thrill of a Lifetime had Iron Eagle on it. You know, we did a good video and everything. And it sold, you know, back in the day, you know, it sold 100,000, 110,000. But that was nothing, 150,000, 200,000. No, we did more than that. We did 250,000. That's nothing. Back then, you know, Bon Jovi was selling 5 million. That Whitesnake album sold 10 million in America.
Yeah.
You know, I could have stabbed my eyes on that one. You know,
the only one that made more money than Whitesnake was the Aquanet hair company.
Yeah, right.
But hey, look, you got "Do You Think I'm Sexy"? That's exactly certainly a mortgage lifter.
And Young Turks.
And Young Turks, that's right.
Yeah.
All right, Carmine, thank you so much for joining us here on the Vinyl Guide and talking records. Even though most of your records are still in storage, you got a turntable now, so hopefully you'll bust them out and they're not too water damaged or warped. I want to remind folks carmineappice.net. I'm going to put that link in this episode page. Go there. There are all sorts of books and records and products from Carmine. A lot of them are autographed. Also, check out cactusrocks.net. This amazingly influential band. They're still putting out material. It sounds like some more records are coming as well. And this Vanilla Fudge single on Golden Robot Records. There's also videos out there. I'll put those links in this episode page. Check them out. It's an amazing rendition of the Supreme song here. Some 54 years after the original Vanilla Fudge single came out with another Supreme song. It's a wonderful bookend to this amazing career. Carmine, thank you so much for coming on the Vinyl Guide, mate.
You got it, bro.
All right, there's the legend himself, Mr. Carmine Appice. Again, check out Vanilla Fudge's new latest single, Stop in the Name of Love. There's a wonderful video available for that. You can find it on YouTube. I'll link to it in this episode page. Also, cactusrocks.net, the recent album Tightrope, and all their albums before then. Find them on streaming services. And of course, carmineappice.net. Pre-order the Guitar Zeus box set. Lots of Guitar Zeuses on that. Brian May, Yngwie Malmsteen, Zakk Wylde, and more. All available at carmineappice.net. And that's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please share these episodes on your social media. Put them on Facebook, tweet them out on Twitter, even share them on Instagram or the TikToks. That's a huge help, and we'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. So until we talk next time, get out there and buy some records, people. Cheers.
That's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Send your thoughts to Nate at thevinylguide.com or follow or tag us on Instagram at Vinyl Guide. Until next time, keep spinning.